For those of us here in the UK, this is where the Honda Type R story begins. This is, of course, the DC2 Integra, which arrived in the UK in 1998. But in fact, the Type R story is much older than this car. The first Type R was the NSX-R of 1992, which means that in 2017, the Type R is 25 years old. But the NSX-R never came to the UK, and nor did the following two Type Rs that Honda built. They were all Japanese domestic market only. That means the DC2 Integra Type R was tasked with setting out the stall for the Type R brand. Its job was to tell us all in this new market what Type R stood for. It's got every single one of the Type R characteristics that would come to define the brand for years and years to come. So we've got less weight. It's actually not that much lighter than the basic Integra, but it is lighter. We've got a much stiffer body shell. We've got uprated springs and dampers, a much more focused chassis, lovely little Momo steering wheel, Recaro seats, which just give you so much support, and they look fantastic as well. Of course, we've got this incredible, normally aspirated four-cylinder VTEC engine, more of that in a moment. And then we've also got this amazing gear shift with the titanium gear knob, such a sweet shift. This is Type R through and through. This is perhaps the most Type R car Honda has ever built. So it's a 1.8 litre VTEC, of course, normally aspirated, 187 brake horsepower. To get that performance out of it, you have to work the engine really hard. So we've got a red line beyond 8,500 RPM. That's just off the scale these days. You don't see that in a modern performance car unless you're spending six figures. The VTEC switchover point is just short of 6,000 RPM. So that gives you the better part of 3,000 RPM in which to work. It's not a strong engine below that point. But once it changes onto the higher lift cam, the engine just lights up and it just goes. It's like a firework going off. But what's amazing is that that engine isn't even the best point about this car. That's the chassis. It's just spectacular to drive. The car feels light, it's super nimble, super agile. And once you get it moving over 40 or 50 miles an hour, it's so pliant, so controlled. It's a truly, truly brilliant thing to drive. It steers beautifully. I've got lots of feel. The differential is really tight and it just gives the car so much traction. You can stand on the throttle at the apex and just let the diff drag you out of the corner. And with the car being so light, it's only around 1,100 kilograms, it's properly fast. 0 to 60, 6.5 seconds, 145 flat out. Those are still proper performance figures. It's been said that the DC2 Integra Type R is the best front-wheel drive performance car of all time. That's a big claim. But having spent a couple of hours thrashing it up and down this road, I'm not going to disagree. It's truly brilliant. Now, the year after this car arrived in the UK, Honda took that same set of principles and applied it to a very different sort of car. From a dainty little two-door coupe to a four-door saloon car. This is the Accord Type R, which followed a year after the Integra in 1999. Now, it's a very, very different sort of car, clearly, to that Integra, but it's still got all those important core Type R attributes. It's got the stiffer shell, it's got the much more focused chassis, it's got a really lovely 5-speed manual gearbox, it's got that great VTEC engine, and it's got the limited slip differential. The engine is now a 2.2 rather than a 1.8, so with another 400 cc's, we've got more mid-range, more torque, but it's still a VTEC engine. It still needs to be worked really hard. Whereas that Integra Type R bleeds into the VTEC zone, does it quite gradually. This thing's like a switch, let me show you. So 5,000 RPM, foot down, off cam, and just like that, it comes on cam just shy of 6,000 RPM, and the thing just lights up. We've got a red line beyond 8,000 RPM, which for a four-door saloon car is kind of crazy, isn't it? But brilliant. It's a bigger engine, so it's got more power than the Integra, 209 brake horsepower. But it's a couple of hundred kilos heavier, this car, so it's not quite as quick, but still. 7 seconds to 60, 140 flat out. It's still a properly quick car. These cars are such good value today. They start at less than £2,000. For this drivetrain, for that amazing engine, lovely gearbox, really good limited slip differential, that's just a bargain. £2,000 for all of that, and you get the rest of the car thrown in as well. At that sort of money, you sort of might as well. Given that this is a much bigger, heavier car than the Integra Type R, it doesn't quite reach the same heights dynamically, but still, for a four-door saloon car, it's still really, really good to drive. We've got lovely steering, we've got plenty of grip, we've got a really, really well-controlled body without the springs being super stiff. At 1,300 kilos, this is still a really light car. It still feels agile, it feels really nicely balanced. You can lean on it so hard, and it's got tons of grip. I've never driven one of these before, but it's so cool that I think when I get home, I'm probably going to find myself in the classifieds. It's 2001. The Type R brand is well established in the UK now after the Integra Type R and the Accord Type R. In Japan, Honda launches the DC2 Integra Type R, but that doesn't officially come to the UK. So here in the UK, we get this, the first Civic Type R, the EP3. In fact, this isn't actually the first Civic Type R. That was the EK9, which came 4 years earlier, but was Japanese domestic market only. That was one of the cars that we in the UK missed out on. So as far as us Brits were concerned, this EP3 was the first Civic Type R. Just like those first two cars, this Civic has got all the same Type R credentials. It's got now a 2-litre, normally aspirated VTEC engine. It's got a lovely gearbox, this time with 6 speeds. It's got a stiffer, more focused chassis, a stiffer body shell. I've also got the Momo steering wheel and these really lovely Recaro sport seats. The engine, 197 brake horsepower, redline 8,000 RPM, and the VTEC point is at 6,000. Again, like the Accord, it's really distinctive. So 5,000 RPM, foot down, and there we go, it switches over and the car just leaps forwards. It actually feels really, really quick once you get the engine going. The gear shift is lovely and the lever is right next to the steering wheel, and the chassis feels fantastic. It's a lovely, taut, stable chassis. So of the 3 cars I've driven so far, this is the fastest down the road, I'm sure of it. It's light, it's nimble, it's fantastic fun to drive actually. Back when it was launched, this car cost just over £16,000, which at the time, for 200 horsepower, was an utter bargain. And today, they're also cheap. You can pick them up for just over £2,000, which, given how exotic that engine is, how exciting the engine is, how fast the car is, how fun it is to drive, that's no money at all. So by this point in 2001, what had we learned about Type R? What had we come to expect from the brand? Well, of course, amazing engines that were truly the heart of the car. High revving, really exciting, really snarly, really fun engines. We came to expect really good mechanical, really direct gear shifts. And dynamically, we'd come to expect Type Rs to be some of the most entertaining, affordable performance cars on the planet. The first Civic Type R, but that didn't come to the UK. So this, as far as we're all concerned, is the very start of the Civic Type R dynasty. Six years after the EP3 Civic Type R came this, the FN2 Civic Type R. It may only be a few years younger, but it looks like it's from a completely different age. In fact, it still looks like something that's just landed in some hillbilly's backyard. It still looks like a spaceship. But it still had the same engine as the previous car with more power, 1 more horsepower, and the same 6-speed manual gearbox. So it's still a normally aspirated, really high revving 4-cylinder, 8,000 RPM redline, switch over point at about 6,000 RPM, and again, you still have to work it really hard to get the most performance out of it, which is just so much fun. It's so exciting to keep your foot pinned, you don't dare lift off, you chase the red line, you get down the gears. It's really, really engaging. You can actually split the 4 cars that I've driven so far down the middle. You group the Integra and the Accord together and the 2 Civics together, and not just because they're the 2 Civics, but because of how the cars feel. So the earlier cars have that very distinctive very fluid way of going down a road, lots of wheel travel, lots of body movement. Whereas this car and the Civic before it suddenly feel like much more modern cars. They're locked down, they're planted, they're much more glued to the road. In fact, this one feels so planted that it kind of feels like a proper touring car for the road. There's so little body roll in it, it just feels flat, super direct and responsive. And on this smooth road, it's really, really good. I remember taking one of these to a tourist day at the Nürburgring, and it was actually fantastic. It dealt with lap after lap after lap all day. It was fast, it had lots of grip, it was really, really composed. I didn't know the Nürburgring well back then, and this, I think, was probably just about the perfect car to learn it in. This Type R was a Type R through and through. It's true to the brand, with its much more focused chassis, stiffer body, the high revving engine, the 6-speed manual gearbox with a lovely mechanical direct throw. All those same attributes that I've been talking about all day were present in this car. The Type R that followed, that's where things started to change. FK2 Civic Type R. So here we are, this is the model that's being replaced. It feels like only a couple of years ago that I was on the international launch of this car in Slovakia. It was only a couple of years ago, it's 2015. And already this car's being replaced. It's amazing, it doesn't feel like it needs replacing at all. In terms of performance, in terms of dynamic ability, it still feels right on the money for the class. Up until last year, this car still had the front-wheel drive production car lap record at the Nürburgring with a 7-minute 50 lap. It's still plenty quick enough, this car. It's still so fast, it still feels modern, it's still really, really good to drive. The big news, of course, with this car was the switch to turbocharging. For so long, Type R Hondas had had high revving, normally aspirated engines. This car was a departure from that, and it was a controversial move at the time. But really, Honda had to do it. It really didn't have a choice. When this was launched, 300 horsepower was par for the course in the hot hatch class. And there's just no way of getting that sort of power from a normally aspirated 4-cylinder engine unless you're spending a fortune on it, which would have made the car prohibitively expensive. So for this car to be on the pace of the class, Honda simply had to use a turbocharger. Having said that, the engine still revs to 7,000 RPM. Okay, it's not a 8,000 RPM screamer like some of those other Type Rs, but this certainly revs higher than most turbocharged engines. But all those other Type R attributes are still present and correct. A much more focused chassis, uprated springs and dampers, a really lovely manual gearbox, limited slip differential in the front axle, and tons and tons of cross-country pace. 5.7 to 60, beyond 160 miles an hour. It's quick for a performance car. Never mind a hot hatch, this is quick for a performance car. I don't really know what you have to do to run out of front-end grip in this car. Maybe if you turn into a roundabout at 100 miles an hour, you might get a bit of understeer. It's just got so much grip. It just holds on and holds on. That massive point-to-point pace just makes it so much fun to drive on a road like this. It's so engaging. It's really, really capable. It's just amazing to think that this car is ready to be replaced. If Honda is able to significantly improve upon this Civic Type R, the next one is going to be something else.